Good morning, Vikings fans. This is Morning Joe's. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of PurplePTSD.com, VikingsTerritory.com, and PurpleTerritoryRadio.com. We were off last week, and this week we have a special guest host that's filling in for Mr. Joe Oberle, who is on a 3-week cruise, I believe. I don't know. We don't really talk in between or after or before shows, which I think probably doesn't come as much as a surprise to people that have listened to the show. But Kirby O'Connor is here. What's up, man?
Not much. Just hanging out, ready and excited for the first appearance on Morning Joe's.
Be honest. What are you more excited about? What means more to you, this guest appearance, or the fact that you are perhaps minutes, hours, days away from becoming a father for the first time? Shoot me straight.
Shooting you straight. It's the biggest moment of my life so far, becoming a father. And Morning Joe's is up there in probably the top 50. So
hey, I'll take that.
So you're up there, probably higher than like graduating high school.
Okay.
But lower than the child and marrying my wife and a few other things.
Yeah, I don't have any kids, and I also didn't graduate from high school, which probably I'm kidding.
I would have believed you.
That's my brand. That's what I'm going for. The GED crowd. Kirby is the brand spanking new managing editor of PurplePTSD.com, and he also hosts another new thing, which is the Vikings on the Clock podcast, which you can find on both Purple PTSD and Vikings Territory, but also another new thing, PurpleTerritoryRadio.com. So check out that site. We launched it about 2 weeks ago, and we have all of our shows there. Yeah, it's a good time for you to stop by because we obviously the Combine was... Well, actually, kind of explain who you are first to the audience and namely, like, what Vikings on the Clock is about.
Yeah, so I'm a lifelong Vikings fan. Like most Vikings fans, I was brought into this
against your will,
not by choice, by my family. But Vikings on the Clock is a combination of a few of my great passions. The first being the Minnesota Vikings, the second being college football, and the third being podcasting. So what Vikings on the Clock is I've referred to it as a conversational companion to what we write on Purple PTSD and Vikings Territory. That's the marketing for it. What it really is me and a guest host talking through recent events that will affect the draft coming up. Like you said, the NFL Combine was a big one. Me and Kevin Gendron just covered that, and we had a fantastic show. I've talked with Grant Dahl about kickers and some of that. Previewing possible prospects that the Vikings could go after, and talking a little bit of draft theory and how the Vikings can think about moving forward with that, trying to get in the head of Rick Spielman, which is not always a pretty place, I guess.
Yeah, it's, and we're going to delve into this, but I'm so used to, like, the Vikings via Rob Brzezinski creating, like, doing all these magical things to make contracts work, to open up cap space, so on and so forth. And it's kind of dawned on me last night and this morning doing show prep for this show that has kind of reached its limits. I remember vividly as one of the people who was defending the idea of bringing Kirk Cousins to the Vikings last offseason, people putting like polls up on anti-Cousins people putting polls up on Twitter saying, okay, if you guys really want Cousins, then which of the following players are you willing to part with? And I, off the top of my head, I think it was like Danielle Hunter, Anthony Barr, so on and so forth. And I selected Barr, but I also thought that they'd find a way to keep him. I do think that the fact that the negotiations for his extension, it seemed like this. I mean, we talked about it on this show, on Purple Journal podcast. It just seems like it was a weekly topic for a year and a half. And so, while I'm not surprised that he's gone, I said this on our internal chatting mechanism last night. Just knowing that he's going to the Jets now, and that it's an official thing, it just emotionally, I guess I'm surprised by my reaction to it, because I've never been much of a Barr guy. I don't think in a 4-3 that he is worth max money, which is clearly what he was going for, because he wasn't agreeing to the contracts that they were giving him over the course of the aforementioned amount of time. And so I don't know, like I don't think Barr, as a 4-time Pro Bowler, whatever that means, being an alternate and all that, I don't think he was always worthy of some of the accolades that he's been given. I know that he's extremely physically gifted, and that they brought him in as a guy who was a obvious fit, a Khalil Mackian type pass rusher, and they turned him into this guy who could do anything and everything for the Vikings, pass coverage, so on and so forth. But he's had his issues with Zimmer, and with injuries and or effort. Zimmer calling him out on that. He got burned a few times in that Rams game, which really stuck out to me as a guy who is supposed to be this end-all amazing player, but when it comes to games like that, he just gets picked on sometimes. And so I feel weird about it, because I'm surprised that I feel like, oh man, that sucks worse than I thought it would. But at the same time, I don't think he was and is like this player that can't be replaced in this system. How do you feel? Like, what is your take on Barr as a whole, since our audience really doesn't know you that well yet? And how do you feel about the things moving forward, just in regards to the outside linebacker position?
Yeah, I've been a fan. I was a fan of Barr for sure since day one. Well, I guess that's not true. Since the overtime game in Tampa Bay when he returned a fumble for a touchdown, and that was kind of the cementing moment, I think, for a lot of fans.
That was his rookie year too, right?
Yep, that was his rookie year when we were not great, but it was also Zim's first year, so
7-9, I think.
Yeah, 7-9, just starting to see what we had, but yeah, again, I've been a fan of Barr, but he never held any sort of emotional place in my heart. He wasn't Chad Greenway or Brian Robeson, who are guys that you latch onto and you love. And I mean, understandably, he wasn't here as long, but even guys like Danielle Hunter, Danielle Hunter's a guy that if the Vikings lost him, I would be absolutely crushed.
Yeah.
He's a guy that I've fallen in love with.
Speaking of Khalil Mack.
Speaking of Khalil Mack.
I mean, they're similar in output, in dominance. I don't think Barr, not to interrupt you, but I don't think Barr ever took over a game. I don't know if the system allotted for that, but at the same, you know what I mean? Like, it was never like, oh man, Barr's just completely shutting this team down.
Right, yep, and he made some splash plays for sure, but for the most part he was just solid and did his job, which I guess is what you're looking for. But
yeah,
and maybe that's why I'm sad to see Barr walk, and I'm sad to see that they couldn't figure it out. But I'm not nearly as concerned about losing him as I am about some other moves that have been happening.
Yeah.
And losing him outside of our division, outside of our conference.
Yeah.
He's going to the Jets, who the Jets have a lot of young talent, but for the time being, the Jets can't hurt us. I'm not upset where he went. I would be upset if he had left us and joined the Packers, say.
Yeah.
But to see him go to New York and get paid a lot of money, yeah, on some level I'm sad, but I'm also kind of glad that, he's going to get his worth, and hopefully they'll get the most out of him, being in a 3-4 and being able to rush the passer.
I wanted to add that, so I had it on, tape, that I think people are going to... It's kind of an apples and oranges situation. I think in a year or two, people are going to say, holy, F, look at what the Vikings could have had, or they should have let Barr go because he's got 15 sacks, and that's because I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm assuming they're going to use him to rush the passer a lot more in a Mackian sort of way. So it's just you can't really compare the two because he's going into an entirely different system that might revolve around him a lot more. And people are going to say, God, the Vikings blew it. They should have kept him, but they never would have used him that way. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's important. And the only thing that really, to me, kind of sucks about this whole thing is I just didn't want the Vikings to add, and this is an impossible thing to do, but to add more needs as the draft approached or as free agency approached, because they have a limited amount of cap space, they have a limited amount of picks, and they are obviously so ridiculously thin, worse off now than they were, at the end of the season, and they're in pretty rough shape in regards to the guard position on the offensive line. And so now, you have people. I was listening to the Power Trip Morning Show this morning, and Meat Sauce was going on and on about how the Vikings need to use their first pick at 18 to pick up a linebacker. And it's well, yeah, I mean, I can see why they might want to use a higher pick for that, and guards traditionally aren't, high picks. But in regards to Barr, it's just another need that they have that, obviously we were talking right before the show started that the Vikings have, I found $4.9 million in cap space, and I don't know if you found the same thing, but it's it's kind of they're at the position where maybe they can get a journeyman on a low contract, but they might, with all these rumors about Trey Waynes and Xavier Rhodes and teams, the Vikings taking offers for them, maybe they are going to have to end up making a trade to bring in a guard, because I can't see how they can afford them otherwise, assuming the contracts work. And you wrote an article about that, about the Trey Waynes and Kevin Zeitler trade rumor working out for both parties. Clearly, he's already he's gone. Mm-hmm. So that's not going to happen. But I mean, do you foresee them maybe doing something like that? It's so interesting right now because we're in a weird spot. You talk about needs. Just to go back to that need thing real quick with the linebacker position. I'm not sure the system that they're in, how much of a need they actually have to replace Anthony Barr. Interestingly enough, because I feel confident with the way that he performed last year, I feel confident running Eric Wilson. Me too.
In that defense. But like you said, creating needs. And then to go to the point of trading either Waynes or Rhodes for a guard, I don't know if that specifically will happen, but I know that one of our bigger names is going to have to lose. We're going to have to lose, obligation to pay one of our bigger guys in some manner. And to see Waynes moved for a top-tier guard, or to see Rhodes moved for a top-tier guard or tackle, would be, the ideal for me, but I don't know who. I don't know who's being shopped really at the guard position anymore. Now that Zeitler's gone, Osamel from the Raiders, he moved to New York
Juwan
as
James
well.
is going to Denver, I believe.
Yep, he just signed in Denver for a huge contract that there's no way the Vikings could have met. I've got a list of free agents here, and they're not great. Darrell Williams from the Panthers, he's 27, so he's owed a huge contract probably, even though he missed all but one game in 2018. George Fant for the Seahawks, very athletic, played kind of a tight end offensive tackle hybrid in their 6-man offensive line. After that, it's a lot of, 33-year-old, and then you get down to the rest of them, and you realize Rashad Hill's up there with everybody who's a free agent now. And
That's terrifying.
Yeah, the free agent pool is not very big, so you would think a trade would have to happen.
Yeah.
But the problem is, outside of the two guys who've already been moved, nobody's moving top-tier linemen because... Yeah. This is the NFL. All linemen are super valuable.
Except for Rick Spielman, apparently, who ignored the offensive line for half a decade, which is something that I've been harping on for like 4 years now. And I don't like to, I really don't actually like to pat myself on the back about stuff. I give myself, I've been told maybe too much crap for bad takes that I've had. But... I was told by a lot of people, one person in particular who no longer works for us, that I was basically crazy and that the Vikings had a plan, and playing that not Matchbox 20, Third Eye Blind, step back from that ledge type stuff, and it's just at this point, and I alluded to this earlier in the show, I'm getting very... If I had my Apple Watch on right now and put on like the EKG app, it would start on fire. I'm like really starting to worry about this, and I don't think that I understand that Brian O'Neill, despite articles that have been recently, is looking like a stud at right tackle. And so I'm not arguing against that. I just was always against the idea of moving Remmers to guard. And I understand they needed to do that in the playoffs before the Saints and Eagles game. But I feel like they had to move on from him. He was a disaster. I get that. But that was just another example of how they had no plan. They brought him in here to play tackle. They had to move him because of injuries. And then Berger retired. And for whatever reason, they decided to go after another cornerback, which I guess now might end up, benefiting them depending on the trade stuff. But it's just, it is, to me, everything goes back to the offensive line and the hubris of this management going with all these defensive guys when they clearly have been able to develop late-round talent into defensive studs like Holton Hill. So it's just I'm getting angry about it, I guess, is my point. The question I wanted to ask you has nothing to do with that, but I wanted to vent for a second. In the argument about Trey Waynes and Xavier Rhodes, I've been surprised as a guy who actually, I don't know if I've ever told you this story, Kirby, but one of the main reasons that Purple PTSD started in the first place was that I kind of got run out of Reddit for two reasons. One was that I was never a big Teddy guy. I wasn't anti-Teddy. I just kept telling people to pump the brakes and say that he wasn't elite yet. But
temper expectations.
Pretty much. I'm like, this guy is not an elite quarterback like he might be, but he's not. And people really did not like that. And then the other thing was I got into a week-long, actually it was a 3-week-long argument about Trey Waynes because Arif Hassan wrote an article about Trey's shuttle run, and he had a really bad shuttle at the combine. And so the conclusion was that he's fast running forward, but he literally cannot turn. And so everyone was saying he couldn't turn, he was some sort of Frankenstein. And I said, that's nonsense. He was hurt. That's been reported. He pulled his groin running his 40. And that's why his numbers were so bad. But, people didn't like that and basically said, if you think you're so effing smart, why don't you start your own website? So I did.
You shielded them.
Yeah, pretty much. And so I've always been a Trey guy. I am a Big Ten homer. But point being, I've been surprised by the amount of people that have said if it comes down to Trey Waynes or Xavier Rhodes, that they would rather keep Trey instead of Rhodes. And I understand that he's been hurt and quote unquote hurt with these massive injuries that turn out to be like he plays next week. And a lot of people think he's taking dives or whatever. But I was surprised by that, and I wanted your opinion on if it came down to one or the other, and you had the power to, assuming the draft cat, like the what you got in return was the same. Who would you part ways with?
Yeah, so there's two schools of thought at play here. First of all, I guess I'll state my opinion on them head to head, and them as players before I get into the minutia of dealing with their contracts and everything.
Yeah,
Xavier Rhodes is an excellent. Is one of the top cornerbacks in the game today when healthy. He can shut down the best players in the game, and we've seen it over and over again, time and time again, against Antonio Brown, against Julio Jones. He has showed up against Odell Beckham Jr. He has showed up and shut them down. He is that kind of player.
Yeah.
Trey Waynes has been an excellent cornerback too, and when needed, has been good enough to keep us in ball games.
And he's an elite run stopper too. I wanted to throw out there.
Yeah. Definitely supporting the run. He is better than Rhodes. Now, getting to what I think the biggest difference between them, and you alluded to it, is Waynes has, as far as I know, always been available to play, other than maybe one or two games here and there. Rhodes is always, it's a question mark. You see the injury report every week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday practices, and Rhodes every single week is limited or did not participate on Wednesday, and then even by Friday he's usually limited participation, and he's given the questionable, thing. And maybe that's just us as fans not seeing what the organization sees, and they want to be cautious, and they don't want to say what's happening. But there's been more than enough times that Rhodes just hasn't played, or like you said, he leaves games halfway through with some sort of phantom tweaked hamstring or hurt ankle.
Coincidentally, every time he gets burned, pretty much.
just happens to be, and maybe that's something where he's pushing too hard after he sees he's getting beat, and that's how he hurts himself.
Or that's why he gets beat, because he got hurt. I can understand that.
Yep, and you don't know what that difference is, what that is, but the fact is he's not always available. Waynes is always available, and when you see him in there, you don't notice enough of a difference for what their pay difference is, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I get what you mean. That that there's not a significant drop-off when Rhodes isn't playing lately versus the amount of money he makes versus Trey Waynes.
Yep. And now getting into trading them and their contracts, Waynes is only under control through this year for $9 million. Rhodes is under control through 2021 or 22 or something.
Yeah.
He got an extension he's at $13 million is his cap number right now.
Wow.
I don't see the difference enough for us to keep Rhodes and not Waynes. I guess I'll throw my support fully behind if we trade one of them, we move on from Rhodes and we figure out how to get Waynes an extension before he hits free agency next year.
Yeah. I think too that Rhodes is a bigger name nationally, and that might drive the return on the trade might be higher, despite the fact that the team would have to take on a larger contract. I also think, this is such an interesting subject because I do also think that people are making some assumptions, present company excluded, but that Mike Hughes, A, is going to be healthy when the season starts, and B, is going to be a stud, despite the fact that he saw very, in this system, which is very complex for corners, that is, Rhodes, Waynes, both took seasons to really get to the level that they're at. Even Holton Hill, who I mentioned earlier as a stud, he's coming in. He had that pick on the first play against Green Bay, I believe. But he's
New York, but yeah,
New York. There you go. He struggled too, and they have Mackenzie Alexander, but he's more of a nickel guy. The idea that he's gonna just fill in and there's not gonna be significant drop off, I think, is kind of a farce. But at the point we're at, they need to free up some money, and they do have to look at, okay, where do we have depth and talent worthy of a trade? Both of those lines intersect, obviously, at the corner position. They've invested heavily in it, a lot of first and second round picks, so that makes sense. I wish that wasn't the case. Losing Barr and Rhodes, or Barr and Waynes, would be a significant thing. I hate to throw these tangents out there, especially ones that weren't on the agenda, but I never actually posted my retort to Joe Oberle's support for Zimmer article when there was a lot of people saying Zimmer should be fired. And the main crux of it was that Zimmer, I think, has reached his peak in regards to how far he can take the Vikings. For all the investment in the defense, this defense has not been able to stop these high-octane offenses run by young or semi-young in regards to Doug Peterson offenses, and that I thought that maybe the team should make a switch to a more offensive-oriented head coach, because there needs to be some sort of change, and I thought the team had reached its peak, and I thought that perhaps with Kirk Cousins, so on and so forth. And so I worry that, okay, this team has, been exposed, quote-unquote, by, the Rams and the Eagles, and that's when they had, all-pro guys at nearly every position on defense. And what does this mean if we're going to be, switching in players and switching out players to compensate for the offensive line? And so, again, no question or anything there. I'm just... the idea that I had a few weeks ago to kind of placate myself, that they can just draft a few guards and go into this season fine. I'm starting to worry a little bit about that thesis, I guess. Am I being crazy, or that's always a good question for a podcast?
No, I don't think you're being crazy by any means. It's always good to question the regime, so to speak. And I think it's good to question Mike Zimmer, because he has yet to figure out an offense that works. Other than Pat Shurmur, playing with what he had. I think it comes down to who your offensive coordinator is and who the offensive coaches are, especially for a guy like Zim, because he doesn't run the offense. Now the problem there is, when you don't have anybody when you don't have Pat Shurmur locked in because he's a coordinator, not a head coach, what happens when he has success? He's gone. So you can't get that continuity going. So you're on your third or fourth, or your fourth offensive coordinator in the years you've been here. I think Zimmer has an incredibly high ceiling if he has the right offensive coordinator. Now, unfortunately, what seems to be happening is we put everything together except for one thing every year, And then the next year, it's a complete scramble to see what we've got to figure out this year. When it was last year, it was Shermer's gone. We don't have an offensive line. Nick Easton's out for the year. Berger's retired. The year before that, it was we don't have a quarterback. Well, we did have a quarterback, and then his knees blew out.
Yeah.
It feels like it's always something, and I know the NFL is that way. It's always something.
Yeah.
But it's the game is how you adapt to that and how you deal with that. And when you don't have an offensive-minded head coach, you don't have continuity on your offense. So that's where Zimmer's problem is, in the fact that he's a defensive head coach who's very hands-off on the offense. Because if we ever do have a year where we have an extremely good offense run by an extremely good coordinator, he's gone. There's no way he doesn't get a head coaching job because someone's going to want that.
And that's one of the issues the problems that comes with success. And also, I think in investing in a head coach who is been a coordinator for decades. I've talked about this a lot on the show. Something that just aesthetically, to me, looks a little off in regards to how Zimmer runs the team, and that's whenever the Vikings have the ball, he puts his microphone and his headset up to mute it. And I've always thought that, granted, they do their a ton of prep for their opponent, and Zimmer, I am sure, is analyzing the defensive scheme of the opposing team and saying, okay, this is how we can attack them, because he is a brilliant, quote-unquote, defensive mind. But at the same time, during the game, it'd be nice if he was, part of that conversation, to maybe learn a little bit more about. He tries so hard to do things right, after, the Rhett Ellison thing and some of the negativity that the players. We talked to Chad Greenway about that when he was on the show the last couple times. Him bringing Greenway in and saying, how can I be a better head coach? What should I do from a media standpoint? But, it just to me seems like he's not a part of that conversation. And so what happens is you get a situation like this year where it was kind of perplexing for them to give Stefanski the job, but then essentially try to maybe overthink things a la the scheme against the Eagles, and then bring in Kubiak and then kind of take away some of the personnel decisions from Stefanski and let Kubiak hire essentially his staff from Denver. And it could work, but we had 3 head coaches in Sperano, Shermer, and North Turner a couple years ago, and that clearly was too many cooks in the kitchen, but it ended up being a net positive because of what happened with Shermer. But I would not be surprised if Stefanski was gone midway through the season, depending on how things go. And I just feel like it's an overcompensation based on a lack of knowledge about the position, where he could spend some time, and he's been here long enough to have more input, but that's kind of just a personal gripe, I guess. So some of the other news going on, the Vikings did actually make a free agency move. They're bringing back Shamar Stephen, who I think was in Seattle just for a year. That's a depth move for the defensive line.
It doesn't seem like it. Not to question you, but
you're right.
Shamar Stephen is guaranteed. Not guaranteed. Sorry. His number. He's what? Somebody tweeted about it just recently. Ian Rappaport. No, not that one. Shamar Stephen agrees to a 3-year, $12.45 million deal that includes $5 million in the first year. So you are paying him to be a starter.
Yeah.
You don't pay a guy $5 million to ride the bench. Not a guy this young. Not to question what you're saying.
No, I assumed that he'd be behind Joseph, not that he'd be replacing Richardson, just because I forgot maybe that he was a 3 tech. But yeah, no, I mean, I'm wrong all the time, as I said earlier in the show. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, God, I'm just. This is not how I expected any of this to go. I guess it's it's something, and
it's a move. I tweeted back to Nick Olson, who was the one who showed it showed up on my Twitter feed that he said yikes about it. And I tweeted back that I thought it was interesting. Well, I was worried that we put $5 million into a position where there wasn't truly a need there. Like it's great to have Stephen back as a young guy with a lot of potential for 3 years, but to put $5 million in him when you have Jalen Holmes and what's the other one? Jaleel Johnson
from Iowa. Yeah.
Yeah. When you have two other young defensive tackles who seem to have a lot of potential, and then you move out to the end spots and you've got just a boatload of talent that you could conceivably run them and see what they do. It's just I didn't see a need there in any manner. I don't care if they like Shamar Stephen.
And this is going to sound stupid because I was confused about his position on the line, but I've always thought the same thing in regards to, I understand that Zimmer likes depth on the line and that he likes to rotate guys in and out, a la Bill Belichick or something, but I agree with you, especially considering how little money they have and how really they could make one or two mid-sized moves. I again think that it's indicative of the overinvestment in the defense at the expense of the offense. And I know that Joe Oberle, not to bash him while he's not here, like people are defending Michael Jackson, he's dead, he can't defend himself. They say, well, what moves would you make on defense? It's teams have to make sacrifices to fill positions. I could also see people saying, well, you're griping about losing Barr, Waynes, Sheldon Richardson, so on and so forth, but that's being done to open up money for the offensive line, and it just isn't, though.
Yeah.
They could have used that money for a guard. I think they have one guard on the under contract right now. You're right. I mean, I said it was something because it was something. They did make a move, but I don't understand. It's
not the move that you want to see.
When are they gonna realize how bad the offensive line situation is? Before, the only time I ever have raised my voice on this show, other than for effect, was when Luke and I were debating about Kirk Cousins, and he was saying that, he's a garbage time player, so on and so forth. And I will say that I understand now kind of what he meant, just because Cousins did have one of the better years of a Vikings quarterback statistically. But that didn't really turn into anything. But I made that argument before the draft because I assumed that they would be replacing Berger and investing more in the line, and they didn't do it. And so, like I said earlier, again, I kind of thought at the end of the season that they would go all in on the line. Both in free agency and in regards to the draft, and a lot of that might have been ignorance about the salary cap. But it just seems like they keep doing the same thing. And I said if they don't go 3 guards in this draft, I'm gonna just open source the website and give it away, man, because I am
just
going
hand
to
it off.
lose my freaking mind more so than I already have.
Yeah, it's so tough. It's so tough to watch, especially because we don't. They cut Sendejo and Remmers yesterday. That was the first move that they did. Was they cut Sendejo and Remmers, and you're thinking, okay, they freed up about $10 million worth of cap space.
Yeah.
So you say, okay, cool. We've got $10 million extra to work with. You're right around $14 million.
Yeah.
In cap space. You can make a couple of mid-tier moves, or you can splash for an offensive lineman at that point.
Like an elite one.
Right. And then you tender Rashad Hill and Anthony Harris, and you say, okay, that makes sense, but now you owe them $5 million because Harris is $3 million, Rashad Hill's $2 million, assuming no one offers them.
Oh, the market for Rashad Hill is going to be through the roof. Yikes.
Yeah, well, and the market apparently for Harris is popping with a few teams. So
I'm joking about Hill, but I'm not surprised about Harris based on the season that he had.
Oh yeah, he was very, very solid in a very good defense. But it's so interesting. You put $5 million towards them, so you lose that essentially what you freed up from Sendejo.
Yep.
So you've got $9 million to work with. So you're thinking, okay, you got to use $3 million approximately on your draft picks. So you've got $6 million. You can still sign at least one person and bring them in, maybe another person if they're super old, kind of like an Andre Smith or somebody in that range who maybe you see what's left on the tires. But now you go and you sign Shamar Stephen for starter money.
Yeah.
And you've killed all of your cap space again. And now I'm looking at our list, now you can't pick up a kicker.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I
know that my entire article about Bailey or Gostovsky is basically all for nothing. They can't afford him. So
they're gonna have to draft and hope, and there's some solid kickers in the draft. Grant and I have talked about it. There's Matt Gay from Utah, has a huge leg. There's Cole Tracy from LSU, who's shown to be clutch, but Daniel Carlson was supposed to be a great kicker. Blair Walsh was a great kicker in college, and he did have a great year in the NFL his rookie year.
Yeah,
but both of them obviously were not the answer.
Yeah.
So now you've hamstrung yourself at another position where you can't. It's we sit here and we try to watch it, we try to understand, and we try to say, okay, maybe they know something that I don't. Maybe they've got something that I don't understand.
Yeah, I hear that a lot when I complain. Like you think you know more than them? At this point, maybe.
It's just interesting. Maybe they are counting on restructure from Rudolph and a cut or a restructure or a trade of Everson Griffin. Maybe they're counting on those two things. Yeah.
Isn't the word though that they're not going to restructure Rudolph's contract, at least from a couple days ago when I know you wrote the kind of prelude to free agency article, and things are fluid. That
was, I was looking at Rudolph just before we started the show. I was looking at Rudolph on Twitter, and apparently there was a Star Tribune article, which I can't read because it's behind a paywall.
Yeah, I have the same problem.
With some sort of quote from Rudolph that was to the effect of, why would you not take a restructure? You get guaranteed money, and the team has more cap space to put weapons around you. And I thought, if that is true, that indicates that Rudolph is looking for a restructure, or that the team and Rudolph are looking for a restructure and figuring it out.
Do you recall what day that quote was from?
I believe, I can actually look at it right now. I've got Twitter open. I believe it was very recent, like less than 24 hours.
Oh,
no, it was more than. Sorry,
I have the printed sports section here. I thought I could find it.
It was March 10th actually, so you might have it.
I'm gonna dig for it for just future reference. If I find it, I will post the quote in the article for the show. So go to Purple PTSD or Vikings Territory. The quote will be there, but I think you got the crux of it. Which is interesting. I mean, that would, I guess, be not I guess, but that I would be very happy if that happened.
Mm-hmm.
From both of them. You know, I do think Everson Griffin is going to bounce back this year. You know, he's up until this last season, he's been having, you know, these runs where people think he might eclipse Strahan's single season record, and now we know that even in some of those seasons he was dealing with some mental health stuff. So now that he's addressed it and is most likely on medication, as long as he doesn't do what I did when I got an antidepressant, which is gain 100 pounds, he should be perhaps at a level we haven't seen from him. I mean, I think he's 30 now, so he's still technically like in the prime of his athletic abilities.
For a defensive end, if we're assuming that Everson Griffin is the level of athlete that we should assume that he is, you know, Julius Peppers is still incredibly in shape and plays, you know, very well for his age. You know, 30 is not the end for most positions on the field. But like, I think most people think
like everyone's 30, a running back. Yeah,
like everyone's a running back or a receiver. And even receivers, unless they're, you know, just straight speed guys, they play for, you know, they can play till 35.
Yeah. I mean,
still be very effective
with today's training and like supplements and stuff like that. Frickin' Terrell Suggs is still playing. I think he signed with Arizona.
$7 million in Arizona at almost 40.
He got drafted the spot before Kevin Williams. I remember I was at work, my summer job in college, and I went to the break room to see. I wanted Suggs. And I think that was the time that the Vikings went over on the clock. Speaking of Vikings on the clock,
hey,
talk about branding. I think that was the time that they went over, quote unquote, on accident. Frickin' Red McCombs is such a cheap bastard. He's still plugging along, and he's still productive. I mean, $7 million. The Vikings couldn't even afford him. He's 40 years old.
36. I was a little over on the estimate. Yeah, I thought he was much older.
Yeah, because I was in college, like, during the Reagan administration.
I suppose he's been playing for 16 years now, so...
Okay. Wow. We should talk about, really quickly, something that happened since the last show, too, was that Rock Thomas was arrested for having, like, 140 grams of marijuana. Coincidentally, the state of Minnesota... which I didn't know this until I heard it on the radio this morning. They had a vote to legalize recreational marijuana yesterday, and in typical Minnesota fashion, it was blocked or voted down. People think of Minnesota as a very liberal place, and it is, but it's very conservative in regards to that kind of stuff. Like, we just got Sunday liquor sales this past year. We have like all these restrictions on drinking and so on and so forth. I don't know if that's a Scandinavian thing or what, but
I believe it's a religious thing. Not to poo-poo religion. I think it's rooted in the Lutheranism and the Catholicism that is prevalent in the rural communities in Minnesota.
Yeah, I know that. God, I mean, I just we don't get into politics on the show. I don't. As a political science major, the right wing, whether it's Republicans, quote unquote, or libertarians, are supposed to be for individual liberty, and classic liberals are supposed to be the same way. They're very similar in that regard. And I've always believed that if you're not harming anyone else, you could argue maybe you're harming your own body, then you should be allowed to do that within reason. I guess people don't need to be banging heroin on the street or anything, but I thought it would have been ironic that he was arrested like a week before it was legal.
Before a bill to legalize it, yeah.
Yeah. But the word is that there might have been another Vikings player with him. I didn't look into that any more than when I saw that yesterday.
I haven't seen anything else. I know who it was.
Kirk Cousins?
No, not Kirk Cousins. Surprisingly enough, not family man Kirk Cousins. It was Holton Hill, who already has issues with marijuana, apparently.
Dude, that's bad.
But
I didn't know that.
For what it's worth, Hill has not been listed as any sort of collateral damage to the incident.
But the NFL is very it's like their own country, basically. Like the federal judges up in Minnesota have had to kind of shut them down a few times because they kind of ignore law and enforce their own thing, almost like in an ex post facto way. Like our rule wasn't even like that then, but now we're changing it. Now we're going to punish you even though the rule was different previously, which is kind of antithetical to the Constitution. But private businesses, I guess, can do whatever the hell they want. But that just looks bad.
Yeah, well, to the point of the NFL and marijuana, not to get too political, but I don't know if you saw the video of Niles Davis from the Dallas Cowboys recently just quit the NFL with a video of him smoking a very large blunt.
Blunt, yeah. I read about it. I didn't see it.
It's something to behold, and I think you should go check it out, because for someone to put their livelihood, put their personal liberty to be able to consume a substance over the millions of dollars in the NFL, they've got to feel some sort of way about it. And I mean, I feel one way about the NFL and how they decide to change their rules, and I don't want to get into it, but Ray Rice.
It's a rabbit hole.
There's a lot of things that you could get into, and I could say some things that.
Well, I feel like it's a horribly managed league, and I know that Goodell has a ton of power, and that the owners like him because the revenues keep going up, with last year being the exception. But he seems like they're so reactionary as opposed to like having policies that can foresee issues that the league has had forever, like domestic abuse. You think they'd have a more clear set of rules for that, and they did, but not, this, like we said, they changed the rules and then enforced them, and you can't do that. Then there's the issue of legal substance and whether or not players in states where it is legal should be allowed to use it. From a mental health perspective, having just posted an article about support animals on Purple PTSD, because we like to every once in a while touch on that, because I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2014, which is why the site is named that. You have the situation in the NBA with Charles Barkley being completely ignorant to how mental health works and saying that these guys make a ton of money, what do they have to be depressed about? It doesn't work that way. And just going back to the reason I bring that up is because you said something about the players having a need for a substance, and even without CTE, the amount of pressure on these guys, the social media aspect of, I forget what player it was, but he just posted like a list of the top responses to something, he leaving one team for another in free agency, and all the like negative, like you're self-centered, you're like a POS, so on and so forth. It's these guys deal with a lot, and I think that as men it's very hard to come to grips. It took me a full decade to come to grips with what my issues were, and these guys are on such a higher level in that regard. You have to look at why these guys are doing that. I've always been, in regards to the war on drugs, you have to say, okay, why does America have this issue? Why is there such an unquenchable thirst for drugs? And it's a mental health thing, and it touches everybody regardless of income or situation. So I don't think smoking weed is like doing steroids. It doesn't make you a better player. Perhaps Cousins should smoke a little bit because he seems a little OCD. Not to make jokes about that concerning what I'm saying, but he needs to maybe calm down a little bit. But yeah, I think that when there's a need, you have to look at why, as opposed to just banning the self-medication that comes with it.
Yeah, and I think not just the league, but culture in general has been ignorant about mental health for such a long time. We're hitting a point, not to go, we're completely off on a tangent now, but
I know, but that's what's fun about doing this, I guess.
Not just the league and sports and everything, but as a people, we're just starting to deal with the issues of mental health in a more positive manner.
Yeah.
We're not sweeping it under the rug.
Or stigmatizing it, I guess.
Or stigmatizing it. Yeah, we're really trying to work through that. And as far as I can tell, the NFL is generally about 20 to 30 years behind everybody else on
everything. Pretty
much all social issues. And maybe that's my bias and thinking they're not being progressive enough.
No, you're not wrong. I mean, it's kind of like the military. I mean, look at how teams reacted to Michael Sam. They're just not there yet.
Mm-hmm. And just to go off of just to go off on the mental health thing just for half a second, just because I saw it. I saw it yesterday. Was Nick Swartzen, friend of the show.
I was just gonna say exactly that.
He tweeted about Kelly Catlin, who took her own life. She was an Olympic cyclist, and she won silver for the U.S. at the Rio Olympics, and she was a Minnesotan, and she took her own life at the age of 23.
Wow.
So success and money, athletic success and money and everything else can't buy you happiness for this mental health. So in light of Charles Barkley being a complete idiot in this situation, it's baffling to me that people think that money and success is what makes mental health better.
There is nature versus nurture. There is environmental factors for sure, but it's also a brain chemistry thing. I was making six figures when I was 21 years old, as a salesman, and I was miserable. So I'm happier now than I was then, and I live in abject poverty.
Well, it's good that you're happier. Not the poverty so much, but
yeah, you'll see me on the corner asking for change with a huge smile on my face. I wanted to kind of preview something that you pitched last night, which I think is going to be awesome. Which will be kind of a first for us on Purple Territory Radio, which will be a situational, kind of like an anthology series roundtable with some of the guys that we have that will be infrequent, kind of driven by topics as they come up and as they are determined to be worthy of a roundtable. And that is, the first one is going to be kind of looking at the Kirk Cousins deal a year after, and looking at it from the perspective of what's going on with the salary cap. And really, I think that the overarching question would be, should the Vikings have tried, or should have Kirk Cousins offered, or some combination of both, to restructure his deal to keep some of these guys? And I had an immediate answer to that yesterday. I do feel like in talking this out with you, sometimes it does help you kind of come to new conclusions when you talk to somebody about it. And Joe's been out of town, so I haven't really gotten super in depth with like my dad about stuff like this in regards to the Cousins deal. But my initial thought was, of course not. He came here for a reason. Money was part of it. Winning was part of it. But he wouldn't have taken that huge contract just for a year later to, give the Vikings back some of that money when he doesn't need to. I really bought into a lot of the stuff I was seeing on Vikings Twitter, this is an example of a lesson learned for me. But, even up until recently, I thought the idea was, and I even did a poll myself about this, of Sheldon Richardson, Trey Waynes, and Anthony Barr, you can keep 2. Which of those 2 would you keep? Because that's what a lot of people were explaining was going to be the situation for the Vikings, and now it sounds like they very well could lose all 3, which would be really bad. So,
yeah.
I look at that. When you juxtapose it with like what Foles got from the Jags, which I think was 4 years, 52 or 54 million
50,
guaranteed.
54 sounds right.
Yeah, I wrote down both for some reason. And obviously at this point you got 2 years left with Cousins. With even more money than that, but 3 years, 80-some million guaranteed. Then you look at the irony of the Jets picking up Anthony Barr because they lost the bidding war, or even though they offered more money, and taking in Anthony Barr and what's his face, C.J. Barrett, or the other linebacker they picked up for $80 million.
Yeah, I'm not sure who right offhand, but yeah,
C.J. something. There's irony there as well, and so I totally took all the talkers from you because I should have had you, I guess, explain since you'll be hosting that. But
no, yeah, it's totally. I think hit on a little more of what we're gonna talk about, and then kind of how the thing is gonna work. So it's gonna be kind of more of a debate. This idea started as Grant just throwing out, hey, who wants to talk about Kirk Cousins and the fact that if he, kind of strange, not really strange, the nature of his contract, and I think he might have used the word strange or weird nature, that the Vikings haven't offered a restructure. There's been no talk of a restructure. I understand why there hasn't been talk of a restructure from Cousins' point of view. He's guaranteed a lot of money. But what we're going to try to do is kind of pick apart the issues a little bit and get into a little bit of that minutia of what could have happened, what happens now, how that affects, signing free agents and picking up draft picks and, everything else. And just to throw out another name, because I know everybody, throw out two more names, because I know everybody will love it. It'll get the fans going. You could have had Case Keenum back for significantly less, and you could have had Teddy Bridgewater back for significantly less. And I think we'll probably talk about why that didn't happen, or our thoughts on why that didn't happen. I'm not saying one way or the other right now on those two.
Okay, I was going to say, do you want to let people know where you stand on that? But you don't have to, because that'll kind of be a cliffhanger for people listening. I mean, I guess I've never... I was kind of joking before the show. I've never talked to you on the phone before, strangely enough. But I can't remember where you stand on this whole Cousins thing.
I'll let people know what my thoughts are, because I'm the moderator of this whole thing. I'm not going to be injecting too much of my own opinion. I'll be asking questions and pushing discussion, because I think that's a really interesting way to handle things, and I really enjoy, just creating and talking about the Vikings. So I'm going to be kind of the middleman here in this exact situation, but I'll give my thoughts on the whole situation.
Okay.
Going into last season, Kirk Cousins was the right choice. Because you're assuming that you are going to get the same level of play across the board, and then you're upgrading the quarterback position.
Okay.
So you're assuming that you're going to run the ball as well, control the clock, and win. And
get the same output from your defense.
And get the same output from your defense.
Which is like 15.8 points a game as opposed to the 22 that they ended up having.
Right. A whole touchdown indifference.
Yes.
So you add Kirk Cousins, and you assume you went 13-3 the year before. You assume that you add 2 to 3 wins.
Yeah.
And you win in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Going into last season, I was definitely on board the Cousins train.
Yeah.
Because that's all you can do sometimes is just assume that your team is going to be as good and assume that you'll get better from the upgrades that you made.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, hindsight is 2020, and you look at how Keenum did in Denver and how Teddy did as a backup in New Orleans, or how Teddy didn't do as a backup in New Orleans because he only played very sparingly.
Yeah, and he didn't look too good.
Did not look great, but I think that's rustiness, and he played with a bunch of second stringers. I'm going to be honest. I was a Teddy guy, not from necessarily a player standpoint. I wasn't thinking he was going to be elite or all of a sudden turn it on. I thought he had a lot of potential, and I loved the guy as a person.
Yeah.
So, but looking back and looking especially in the last few days at our cap situation, I would rather have Case Keenum on this team leading it, and either Teddy Bridgewater or a rookie or even Kyle Sloter running the backup position. Now, obviously, that's all hindsight. And when the decision was happening, I was all in on Kirk Cousins. I think Cousins has a ton of talent. I think he has a ton of arm talent. I think he does push too hard in the big moments, the big games.
Yeah.
But I also think that the big games that we had last year, our defense continually laid eggs.
Yes.
And our offensive line couldn't move anybody.
Yeah.
Now, I guess that kind of transitions into the same issue that we continually circle back to is the offensive line. That's been the center talking point of this whole offseason for me and for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because
No, I just want to say that you look at it, and since I won't be on the roundtable because I don't want to be omnipresent, because we do have such a talented group of guys that I trust with the brand and so on and so forth, and I do think there's Joe Johnson fatigue with everyone that knows me personally. But I will say that I completely agree with you. Situationally, last year, where we were at, it made sense. I talked about the fact that I made the assumption that the Vikings would pick up some guards in the draft. Now, had they done that, the salary cap situation wouldn't be as tenuous because you would have some young guards on rookie contracts, and you wouldn't have to say we have $5 million to spend to fill all these positions that we just can't do. Everything goes back to the offensive line, like you said. But had they invested in people through the draft, as opposed to picking up Hughes or even Brian O'Neill, who is a tackle, and kept Remmers at tackle, which is his natural position, then we wouldn't be as worried about the offensive line. Or about the cap, because we would have these guys under contract like we do Brian O'Neill and Mike Hughes. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like they kind of they've created this situation, and then they make bizarre moves with the limited amount of money, which we covered. And so I don't want to blame Cousins completely or his contract completely, because it's such a mismanagement of limited funds and draft choices. I mean, after they drafted Matt Khalil in 2012, which was the highest pick in team history, and maybe Spielman felt burned because of that, they didn't pick an offensive lineman before the 4th round for like 5 years, maybe 6. And I always go back to 2015 or 2016 when the team started 5-0, and then with the bye happened, and then the offensive line fell apart, and the debates I had with people that were, it's just bad luck, man, like the Vikings curse. And it wasn't bad luck. You brought up Andre Smith, Jake Long. You brought, they brought, just the last thing I'll say is they brought in a bunch of guys journeyman over 30 with a history of injuries. Was always injured, but super talented. You get him off the couch, his Achilles explodes. That's not bad luck. That's kind of what you expect from that.
Right.
So I feel like this team this management, this regime is going to always be known for that, and I'm going to really resent them for it for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think, especially talking about that Sam Bradford season, the 5-0 and then missing the playoffs, there was an incredible run of bad luck with that year, but like you said, it's not like we had a bunch of young talent that on the line that just didn't pan out or that got hurt. It was a lot of guys who, we knew they were going to be hurt, or, I mean, you can't tell me that they didn't know that Phil Lodeholt was ready to retire, or, that some of these issues weren't there, and there has been bad luck. Joe Berger retiring, John Sullivan losing seasons to neck injuries, and then you let him walk, and he ends up on the Rams. Nick Easton losing an entire season after being a solid guard. There has been bad luck, but every single team in the NFL has that kind of luck. When you look at the Eagles in the 2017 season, at one point their team was, if I'm remembering this correctly, their team was decimated with injuries.
Yeah. And
it's how you put a system around, it's how you build the talent so that you don't have one group that is your breaking point. Because at any point in an NFL game, you can lose pretty much an entire group. Now, for the Vikings, they put all of that on the offensive line. Like, they put that stress on the offensive line continually, and they've done nothing to bring in young guys with talent.
To rectify
They brought in plenty of young guys. They brought in, practice squad players and fourth-round picks and undrafted free agents. They brought them all in and tried to run them through the system along with these journeymen and everything. But that's not, they don't bring in talent. They got incredibly lucky with Rashad Hill. Rashad Hill was a practice squad pick from Jacksonville who has now turned into a decent depth tackle. Not amazing, but decent enough to play, occasionally. And that is about the only... That's the only one that I can think of that is has really been a strong practice squad or, undrafted free agent.
I was going to say, I was going to say O'Neal, but he's obviously a second-round guy. I love how you put it just now. I really do, that you shouldn't have an aspect of your team that if one person or two people go down in a position group, your entire season falls apart. If you're a well-managed team, to have, I understand needing to make choices in regards to limited amount of picks and money and building a team, and you can't have 5 guys at every position in regards to depth. But I think you nailed it. I mean, the only point that I would have made differently, not to argue with you or anything, but that's kind of what we do here, I guess. But I just love how you put it, so I don't want to really crap on it at all. But, seeing like Berger retire isn't, I mean, I want to call it bad luck because you should have seen that coming. And like you said, you should be able to absorb that sort of thing better than they have. And like I said earlier in the show, I don't know how many more alarms need to go off before they make the decision that the offensive line should be the main priority. It should have been last year. I was pleased with the moves that they made 2 years ago in response to what happened after the bye and everything falling apart and Remmers and Reef and so on. Mm-hmm. But then they didn't. I mean, that was the 1 year outside. I talked about the years before that. And then last year, they outside of bringing in a right tackle, that they got. I do think they got lucky. I mean, he was supposed to be. I remember Luke Braun was in town to watch camp last year, and he used to be the co-host of the Purple Journal podcast. He was the first person I ever brought on for Purple PTSD, and he texted me that I'll never forget it. He said if Brian O'Neill wasn't a second-round pick, he would be cut. He's awful. Like, he is so far behind. His handwork is bad. But the crux of it was, if he wasn't, second-round pick, they would have cut him. And, so from that, I thought he was a 2 or 3 round project like everyone else did. Clearly, that didn't end up being the case. But right tackle wasn't the position of need. It was the guard positions. And so it all ties, like you said, man. I mean, just, God, why bring Stephen back when you're so desperate for guards? I mean, so basically the position that we're in, and this is a good segue for your field of expertise, chosen field, since you are kind of an expert on all this stuff, is that the Vikings are either going to have to make some 11th hour restructuring deals, or do it, everyone kind of looks at the first day of free agency, but it goes on for months. That way, or draft a bunch of guys. And I've always felt personally that the draft, and this isn't like some hot take, obviously, but that the draft is such a crapshoot that I'm worried about the fact that we're going to be relying on a lot of young guys coalescing quickly next season on the offensive line, which is looking to be the case again outside of restructuring or maybe the trade. But that market's so thin anyway. So, yeah, dude, I'm super worried about it. And just to get into the draft stuff, I wanted to first, we'll talk about the combine, but you wrote a really great article about Blake Cashman. I think it was last week. And I thought about him as being, I went to the U of M. I love Marcus Sherrills because he's Big Ten and he's a Gopher. I loved your article about Cashman and looking at him as a potential replacement for Barr, just because he's kind of been, he's been the de facto leader on the not de facto, but the leader of the Gophers defense, and he might be able to be that guy, and he's not necessarily going to take a high draft pick either.
Well, and that's what, that's kind of what I was hoping, was that, I tried to strike while the iron was hot while I was writing, obviously, because he had a huge combine. He was up there in the top 5 in a bunch of drills and showed really well. And there was a lot of talk of him from other analysts, not to call myself an analyst, but...
you are an analyst, I guess.
I guess.
That's always a good way to, I guess.
But everybody was using the phrase, they were saying he had a great combine, but it's the kind of thing that makes you go back and watch his tape. And I thought to myself, I was like, well, shit. Because now you go back and watch his tape and you see just how much of an impact he has on the game and just how good he is. His stock is going to go up even more, because teams are going to see he is actually one of the most talented and hardworking linebackers in this class, which is saying something, because this class is pretty stacked for linebackers and edge guys that they call them, like Anthony Barr, essentially. This is a defensive draft, and to have Cashman be up there with those names is crazy good, and I'm excited for the guy. But it kind of disappoints me from a personal standpoint, because
I get what you mean.
It's going to take a 2nd to 3rd round pick now for a guy who was potentially going to fall to the 4th or 5th or even later. Yeah,
and having that proximity to the Gophers, he could have been like a secret for them, like a great late round pick is what you mean.
Yeah, he definitely, I think, would have been on the radar the entire time throughout his time. I mean, the Gophers play Nebraska every year. Spielman, his adopted son, it plays for Nebraska. So obviously Spielman is familiar with Blake Cashman in some manner.
His brother played for Ohio State too, which is just as a Big Ten guy, I've always wondered why they don't go for more Big Ten like offensive linemen, since that's kind of what they're known for outside of like linebacker. Just to complain a little bit more. Sorry.
No, it's all good. That's to transition from Blake Cashman to more what I'm thinking about the draft, because I'm just gonna jump in and get started on the draft. Is we've talked a lot about linemen, and one of the schools where linemen should be most recruited right now, and especially by the Vikings, Wisconsin. Yes.
Yeah.
Totally. And I hate Wisconsin.
Me
but
too.
But they produce a hell of a lineman crop.
Yeah, I read an article that my dad woke me up. I live with my parents. If I haven't made that clear, and my dad woke me up to show me this article that basically said that a couple years ago Wisconsin had this amazing offensive line draft class, but that this year it's like all 5 of their players are basically plug and play starters that have a really high ceiling. And to go back to what you said about Spielman and what I said about the Ohio State thing, we're obviously right next to Wisconsin. We play them. It's a huge grudge match that we have been bad at recent history. It's amazing to me again that that's like being next to Penn State and not taking linebackers when you desperately need linebackers. You know what I mean? Like in the 90s especially. So
yep.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, it's just it's confusing that they don't look. I guess their entire draft strategy has been confusing when you consider the implications of it. I don't know why they haven't been looking at more, and maybe they will this year, looking at more Wisconsin linemen. I mean, I guess Pat Elflein is Ohio State, so that's one Big Ten guy on the line, but
it's I think Riley Reif is Big Ten too, to be honest. I could be wrong.
You probably are not. Riley Reif
look it up.
The Big Ten. But yeah, it's interesting to me because the Big Ten plays a different brand of football than I think a lot of
they don't play a lot of spread football, so they need
colleges
beefy linemen.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
Reif is from Iowa, so
Iowa. Okay, it's interesting to me that that teams decide to go after the players from Florida State,
Big 12,
places that just throw the ball so much, and the college game is set up so that every team can run a spread offense, and it's why offensive lineman is such a crapshoot.
Yeah.
Of the crapshoot that is the draft, the offensive line is the biggest crapshoot of all of it, other than maybe kickers. But at least kickers you can bring in undrafted free agents.
Yeah.
And you've got about the same chance. Lineman is such a shit show, for lack of a better term, because of the college game being so based on the spread offense and the option quarterback and mobile quarterbacks who do everything. And this will transition me into talking about Kyler Murray and his prospects as a running, not necessarily all running, but he does run the ball a lot. His athleticism is great, and that is one of the biggest things about him. But the way that college football is played is not the same way the NFL is played. At all. Yep.
I mean, you got a lot of guys that end up, not to interrupt you, but you got a lot of guys that end up being insurance salesmen. There's such a different discrepancy in regards to playing a bad team in the NFL and playing a bad team in college. I mean, you have guys who, the level of talent is so different from week to week that you have that, and then you also have the fact that historically running quarterbacks haven't done that great in the NFL. I think it's, being able to run the ball and being really physical and athletic is clearly part of it, but it can mask a lot of weaknesses because you can compensate for it by running or so on and so forth. So I've always been an anti-running quarterback guy just because I feel like when you have guys, pocket passers who don't have that to lean on, they have to prepare more. And talking about Kyler Murray, I saw, I know every year, like, the number one prospect gets torn apart at or after the combine. I mean, that's just the way this industry works. But hearing that I heard things like that he was terrible at doing, like, he underimpressed the teams he interviewed with, and he didn't seem prepared, and his board work was awful. That is the type of stuff to me that, it reminds me of like a Jamarcus Russell, who my favorite story perhaps of any quarterback ever was the coaches in Oakland wanted to test whether or not he was even doing any of the work they were asking him to do outside of the facility. So they gave him a DVD and they said, here's a bunch of plays that we might run. Can you go home, watch it over the weekend, and then on Monday tell us which plays you like and which ones you don't. But the DVD was blank. And so
just a blank.
Yeah, so on Monday he came in and he goes, I like all the plays, I trust you. And they're like, he didn't even watch it.
It's very obvious, yeah.
So that's, I'm not to compare him to Jamarcus Russell, but I just, I think they can compensate for things and they don't need to do that work. That's another reason I like the Big Ten, because they have those more stringent academic standards, which means you have to work harder, which shows you have a work ethic, and then you don't just rely on your athleticism to kind of coast through things.
Right, and I have issues physically with Murray as a running quarterback. He doesn't have the size. He's not Cam Newton by any stretch of the imagination.
He's like Russell Wilson.
He's like Russell Wilson, but I don't think as intelligent and as crazy gifted as Wilson is. Murray is also a baseball player, so obviously he has an arm, but Russell Wilson is an enigma that I don't think can be. Can I talk about Russell Wilson for half a second?
Do it, man.
The dude. Where did
he go to school?
He went to NC State and transferred to Wisconsin.
That's right. Sorry, I'm such a homer, man.
The dude is just such an enigma, and I didn't think, for a long time I wasn't paying attention too much to him. I was always like, Seattle's good, but they've got Marshawn Lynch. They've got a crazy good defense.
Yeah.
Their defense carries them and everything. And then I moved out to Portland last year, and I watch a lot more Seahawks stuff now by result, and he's making plays that if he was if he was on, say, the Dallas Cowboys, he would be one of the biggest stars in the NFL. Not that he isn't in Seattle, but Seattle's a smaller market.
Yeah.
And he just makes plays, and
I saw throws from him last season that I've never seen a quarterback make. Like, he threw it straight up in the air, but like 50 yards down the field, and dropped it like vertically down. I forget what game it was. It was late in the season, and it was just like you cannot like defend against that throw. Yeah,
you can't stop it, and add in the fact that he can run. He is crazy good. Now, Kyler Murray is not that player, I don't think. Now, I could, in a few years down the road, I could completely eat my words and say, I was wrong about Murray. He was an amazing guy who has amazing talent, who does all these crazy things. But to me, Murray seems like, without the party aspect, he seems like Johnny Manziel to me.
Yeah, where I can see that.
He has a heck of a college career, obviously has some kind of talent, has some sort of arm talent, but is a runner and does all these things well. Manziel got put in the situation where he went to Cleveland and didn't have anything around him and was expected to be, Cleveland is the worst situation for a quarterback usually. Yeah. So, and then factor in the fact that Manziel has character issues and everything. He just got cut from his CFL team because of character issues.
Yeah, he's bipolar, so that's and I don't mean this to make light of it at all, but there's a reason why that's the number one suicide related mental health issue. It's horrible. And unless you're very committed to your medication regimen, it's next to impossible to even go to work at a liquor store or something, let alone the work you need to put in to be a pro quarterback, or even a quarterback up in Canada. It's just such an incongruent set of circumstances. And so I kind of feel for the guy, but at the same time, he obviously has made horrible decisions, which is kind of part of the bipolar thing, I guess. But I get what you mean. Outside of that, what you mean comparing the two, I mean, considering Johnny Manziel's arguably one of the best college quarterbacks ever.
Yeah, and I think where that comparison, hopefully for Murray, ends is that he doesn't have those issues with his mental health and everything.
Yeah.
And I hope for his sake he slides down the board to somebody who has an established running back at the very least. Now, if he goes to Arizona, he does have David Johnson, and he does have
Frank Gore,
Larry Fitzgerald.
Yeah. Frank Gore just signed with them too, I guess.
Two weapons. Gore signed in Buffalo.
He did?
Yep. So it's him and LaShawn McCoy. I just saw a thing that was they are the two. Oh,
you're right. I was thinking of Terrell Suggs.
Okay, they are the two. The duo with the most yards in NFL history
on the same team.
On the same team at the same time. But I just don't see Murray being plugged into a system like Arizona and being expected to produce right away and be their franchise quarterback and succeeding. Now, Arizona also has Josh Rosen, which would even more confuse the issue of Kyler Murray going to Arizona.
So interesting.
It's a very
that whole thing, with the language they use, at the combine, he's our quarterback for now, or saying that Rosen understands this is a business. They're clearly not committed to him, and then you have to figure out what to do, what team would take him, what kind of return you would get on that investment from last year. It is very interesting. Then you throw into the mix the fact that Kyler, I believe, signed he accepted the signing bonus from, was it the Oakland A's?
Yeah, Oakland A's. He was a draft pick there.
Which ironically isn't that where Russell Wilson also was drafted late? I thought that was Oakland too. I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, I know he was in the Texas Rangers organization for a while, and then got traded to the Yankees organization or something to that.
I will say I clearly love football. I have 3 websites about football, but you look at the contracts and the length of career in the MLB, and you have to wonder, with Bryce Harper getting $350 million, that's very tempting. And I understand how teams might feel what if we draft him and he bails? Does a reverse? What was that guy's name that played for the Browns that decided to play baseball, the quarterback, and then he came and got drafted at 35 years old? I
have no idea who
I'll
you're talking about.
It was a couple of years ago. He didn't make it in baseball, so he got drafted at 27. and wasn't very good. But
Well,
anyway,
yeah, I mean,
that's just another aspect to what makes that interesting.
Yeah, and just to speak real quick about the baseball versus football thing, just because we're on it at the time, and people are going to question, oh well, why did Kyler Murray decide to go football instead of baseball? Well, it's because in baseball you get your signing bonus.
Brandon Weeden.
Brandon Weeden. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
You get your signing bonus as a rookie, and then you get sent to the minors where you get $40,000 a year to keep yourself in perfect shape, hope to get called up, and not get injured and end your career. That is why Kyler Murray is playing football, because he is guaranteed more money out the gate.
Yeah.
He's never guaranteed a shot at the MLB. That is why he is playing football. So just to assuage that quick issue.
And the amount of money he can make immediately from sponsorships versus playing like triple A baseball for a year or two. I mean, just from a brand perspective, has to be really enticing as well.
Yep. So I think he's making the right decision for himself to play football. I just question his ability to get things done. Now that we've spent way too long on a quarterback who has no shot to come to our team, to talk real quick and give a preview of probably what we're going to do for part 2, and also what we've been talking about on Vikings on the Clock. There are a lot of very good offensive linemen in the first and second rounds this year.
Yeah.
I hope we can get one of them. There's a lot of options to take either at 18 or trade back, or if a run is happening, trade up. Now the question is, will Rick Spielman make those decisions? God, I hope so.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think we talked about luck earlier, and you look at, I really do think that they thought after drafting Hughes that they'd be able to. There was a lot of guards in last year's draft, and I think they thought that with their second round pick they'd have at least one or two of the guys on their board, but there was a run in the 30s on guards, and so I think they kind of made a panic pick with O'Neal. It reminded me of when they took Christian Ponder, because there was a run on, or even Laquan Treadwell is probably a better example, because there was a run on receivers. They wanted Doxson, I think, but so I'm a little hesitant for them to even maybe trade down a couple spots, even though, like I said, guards aren't necessarily, top 10 picks, for example. I think they should go after the first guy on their board and not get too cute, because they've been burned too many times. But at the same time, there's you do gain a lot by dropping down even a couple spots in the first round. So they might do that. I fear that, like with you saying what you said about Harris earlier, granted, I'd be surprised if a team would give up a second round pick for him. That would kind of be a nightmare if both, you get rid of Sendejo and then Harris is gone, and then then you have this gigantic need at strong safety all of a sudden. But I guess that remains to be seen. I mean, this is the longest show we've ever done for a reason. I mean, we could talk for the next till my headset runs out of batteries.
Well, I'm trying to push towards. We're going to be back next week.
Yeah. Because Joe's still out of town. Yeah. And I do think that, not that this was necessarily like your combine or anything, but we put the first podcast that I've ever done was actually called 3 Deep. We did in person out at the Mermaid Bar, and that transitioned into the Purple Journal podcast with Luke as we replaced the host of 3 Deep. But God, man, this was super fun, and I think people listening to this should really make sure that they subscribe to Vikings on the Clock, because you're your stuff, and you're super fun to talk to, and I had a great time.
Well, I appreciate that. I really do my best to know what's going on and be able to talk about it. I can thank my father for that. He was very, very analytical and loves to talk about the Vikings and sports in general. So that's kind of been my entire life, is at least like my entire social life with him is analyzing sports and talking about sports. So
I always say that my life, if there was ever a movie that reflected my life as close as possible, it's Silver Lining Playbook. My dad is an OCD, but we definitely we bond over football, and he's gonna listen to this at work and probably feel awkward around me for a while. But yeah, we'll be back next week for sure. I want. Do you know off the top when you guys might be doing the roundtable, and when also you might be doing your next Vikings on the Clock? And also if there is like a day of the week that people should be tuning in, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So the roundtable is hopefully going to be done this weekend, tentatively with scheduling and baby on the way.
Woo. Congrats again, man. That is like super exciting.
Yeah, it is very exciting. Vikings on the Clock is supposed to come out every 2 weeks on Saturday. Usually I get it up on Purple Territory Radio by then. Sometimes it takes me a while to get a post up on Purple PTSD or Vikings Territory, just because I'm covering other things or we're covering other things, and I don't want to push front page space for a podcast that comes out every 2 weeks.
And that's really quick. That's the point of Purple Territory Radio, is that people familiarizing themselves with that. Hopefully we'll be able to post more. We were having an issue with having literally 12 and now 13 shows. A lot of written content was being buried by podcast content, and so we wanted to kind of separate the two. And so we'll do more and more of that. So if people are listening to this, make sure you go to purpleterritoryradio.com, or just subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you hit it on the head. Is just like Purple Territory Radio is made to be our podcast site and hopefully free up the space for other articles and other, many much more, I don't want to say important, but much more like pertinent to reading sort of things. I also just read the official figure, according to ESPN's roster management breakdown, whatever, for Shamar Stephen's contract. His cap hit this year will not be $5 million. Okay. It will be $2.33 million.
Okay.
So
that's better.
A little bit more play. And then finally, just as like a final plug for Vikings on the Clock, one of the things we've talked about in the last issue is compensatory draft picks and how those work and everything. And our final takeaway from that was that the Vikings get screwed one last time by Sam Bradford's knees, because if Sam Bradford had played 10 games for the Cardinals last season, the Vikings would have another third-round draft pick this year. So Sam Bradford's knees let us down one more time.
The ghost of Sam Bradford's freaking knees, man. But yeah, thanks again, man. I mean, I think people understand why you're the new managing editor of the site. I couldn't be happier with what you're doing, and I couldn't, it's not that I don't trust people, but, it takes a while to find the right people to do certain things, and now that we're really trying to rapidly expand and open an office and everything, I think, you've done a ton of great stuff, and I assume you'll neglect your soon-to-be child for the website moving forward. But definitely keep an eye out on Purple PTSD, Vikings Territory, Purple Territory Radio. Things are moving really fast with free agency. Clearly, things are going to be a lot of stuff's been announced, but tomorrow will be super interesting. The rest of the week's going to be great. We'll be back next Tuesday for Morning Joe's, and we'll probably do like a live Q&A afterwards on Periscope. to answer any and all questions about free agency, thoughts on everything. I mean, you guys can ask us anything you want. And just a quick shout out to our soon-to-be official sponsor, Grey Duck Vodka. That's the vodka created by Chad Greenway. It's gluten-free, it's organic, it's all Minnesota produced from Minnesota corn. It's bottled and distilled in Minnesota. I have a meeting with him and his business partners tomorrow to kind of solidify things. But if next time you're at your liquor store, pick up a bottle of Grey Duck Vodka. Go to greyduckspirits.com to find a liquor store near you that has that. But this has been Morning Joe's, or should I say Morning Joe and Kirby. Morning Jokes.
Jokes. We don't have many jokes. No. Other than, did you get my note for Greenway? My love note that I sent to you.
Not yet. Should I print it out and give it to him?
Oh yeah, I think he needs to know just how much he means to me.
That could be a deal breaker. But yeah, this has been Morning Joe's. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next Tuesday. Skol.